News Talk 96.5 KPL. It is Geaux Acadiana with Ken Romero. Without Dr. John today, as I said, he's either missing in action or making house calls or something. But joining me here at 5:02 is Colonel Rob Maness. Colonel, we haven't spoken in quite some time since the last election, and it seems like you've taken a break and you're about ready to storm the citadel of the U.S. Senate once again.
Well, that's right. Thanks for having me back on, Ken. I appreciate it. It's good to talk to your listeners again. We have decided that we are going to explore this U.S. Senate race. We've actually, for legal purposes, from our team's advice, we already filed the candidacy paperwork with the U.S. Senate. Mm-hmm. But we're in exploratory mode and focusing on getting the team ready to go and raising money, because we all know that that's the piece that makes the machinery run the most smoothly, is raising enough money to be competitive.
Sure. It was really, I don't know, kind of shocking in the governor's race, and I know we don't want to focus on that, but there was so much money raised, so much money spent, and as they would have said, the obvious front runner got beat soundly. Sometimes it's all about money, sometimes it's not, and it all depends on what kind of campaign you're running, the type of person you are, I guess.
Well, that's right. I think it just shows that you can have all the money in the world, that if you don't have the candidate that can unify, especially the Republican Party, in this case it was a Republican, that can unify enough folks in a coalition to vote for him, it doesn't matter how much money you have.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, let's talk about your candidacy. You've had some more time to see what's going on with our nation, and I know as a former military person, you've probably got some valuable insights you could throw our way about ISIS and terrorism and whether it's contained or not. So let's go there.
Well, I think so. From our perspective, Louisiana and the country still needs constitutional conservatives to fight in the U.S. Senate and other elected offices too. But I bring the experience of somebody who has served our country in battle multiple times. I have a national security expertise and a leadership expertise that really sets me apart from anybody else in this race. And it gives me a unique perspective on issues like the ISIS issue, or the fact that our president acknowledged in his speech from the Oval Office the other night that he is engaged in combat with the enemy without authorization from the United States Congress, and the fact that the U.S. Congress hasn't taken responsibility for that and fulfilled their constitutional duty to debate it when fighting ISIS. And we now have troops in a foreign country and have been bombing them for some time now. It's a sovereign state that hasn't had a declaration of war or an authorization to use military force. So from that perspective, I believe that I bring a lot to the table.
Colonel, I was upset when the president appointed someone to head the U.S. Army who has never been in the military, and as former Army, I was really disappointed with that, because to me it seems like you've got to have worn the uniform to be able to help run the uniform.
Well, we would prefer that those leaders that are appointed actually have some military experience. Sometimes we get some that don't, and they do fine. But more often than not, they don't do well. And our United States Army has some growing pains, so to speak, to go through. And as far as its size is reducing, smaller than it's been since World War II, I believe. And to have an inexperienced Secretary of the Army leading through that really is questionable. And the whole judgment of the current administration, I believe, from a national security and national interest and foreign policy perspective, is really questionable. They just got the Secretary of the Defense to declare that all jobs are open to men and women. Mm-hmm. I don't think there's been enough looks taken at some of those combat jobs, especially in special forces and the infantry, to make sure that we're doing the right thing, not just by the men in the units in the country, but by the women that are going to ask to serve and those that think they can get that job done.
Sure.
And I speak as a commander who advocated for increasing women in our combat aircraft in the Air Force, because they could do that job, and we saw that they could fulfill most of our combat roles. And I don't think there are any jobs left in the Air Force that are not open to women. But that doesn't mean that it's the right thing to do. what's just been done, especially considering that we're going to have to start thinking about selective service registration. If our all-volunteer force ever gets to the point where we can't recruit enough folks to keep it fully manned and operational, then we may have to go back to selective service. And do the American moms and dads want their daughters to be susceptible to things like the draft if it were ever to come to that?
Sure, Colonel. And I'm going to digress some more from this point, because if we go to selective service, if you can't recruit enough capable people that are qualified, how is it going to work out when we're going into tough times, with terrorism the way it is around the world, and all of a sudden we're going to be just taking people off the street? I don't think that's going to work too well.
Absolutely. One of the things that makes America's armed forces the best in the history of the world today is that it's an all-volunteer force. It's a professional force. Whether it's a National Guard, reserve unit, or an active duty unit, it's all highly professional and all volunteers. Mm-hmm. So the folks want to be there. They want to do that mission, and they're the best in the world at it and have been for quite some time. But if they don't have good leadership, like the Secretary of the Army we just talked about, mm-hmm. and if we don't have good leadership, civilian leadership, setting out the right objectives and giving the generals and admirals and all the way down to the lowest enlisted privates and airmen the capability to go get the mission done, then we stand to lose that.
Colonel Rob Maness is our guest today, and as he said, he's exploring a run for the U.S. Senate. And as with every other race around here lately, it looks like we're going to have more and more candidates. I think we've already got John Fleming. We've got Charles Boustany. We've got, I think John Kennedy may be jumping into the race, as well as yourself, and who knows how many more, So it's going to be another 80,000 miles on your truck this time.
Well, I've heard 3 or 4 more names that are pretty reliable rumors out there, so there may be, in fact, more. But you know what? We're going to focus on what Rob Maness can bring to the state of Louisiana and to the country, and the leadership experience, the national security expert that the country needs. We just had that attack out in San Bernardino, California, from this ISIS team that's out there. And we need folks in the United States Senate that understand that what it takes to have a viable national security policy that understands how to weave that in with foreign policy, and instead of seeing these amateurish moves happen, actually are able to build strong coalitions across the world so that young men and women from the United States and other countries aren't sacrificed needlessly in these conflicts. And we've got to really get on top of that, and we need more folks that have my background and experience, especially in the Senate and the House of Representatives.
And, when you think about the fact that the president and many in his cabinet have said they don't want to see American boots on the ground because we've drug out this war for like 10 years and we don't want another 10 years. Well, if they'd taken care of business 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 years ago, we might not be in the position we're in.
Oh, you're absolutely right. And if our Congress had taken care of business when this president started his ground action and then was disingenuous with the American people about it almost a year ago, at the same time he started bombing Syria, inside of Syria, then we might not be in the position we're in either. So we've got to have folks that are willing to step up to their constitutional responsibilities, also willing to hold the executive branch and the judicial branch in checks. That's checks and balances. That's what we have a U.S. Constitution for. And I'm very concerned that this foreign policy and national security predicament that we're seeing evolve and emerge here is going to put the United States and, most importantly, our young men and women, get them backed into a corner without the right amount of support from the people at home, and in a war that has endless non-objectives that results in a lot of American blood spilt for no reason. So we have to have folks that are willing to take those responsibilities and take the standards up and argue with leadership in the parties and leadership in each of the branches of the government in order to make sure we're doing right by our country and our our citizens.
Sure. Colonel Rob Maness is our guest. It's 5:12 here at KPEL. Colonel, in the last minute or two, tell us a little bit more about yourself and the campaign. It's stuff that we may not have heard the first time from you because you were new at this game, but you've had time now to take some hard shots from some of the other candidates and this radio station. So let's have what you've got.
Well, Rob Maness is a career military officer. Served as an enlisted officer in the United States Air Force for 32 and a half years, and was blessed to be able to come back and settle in Louisiana 4 years ago. I worked in the utility business as a junior executive for Entergy for 2 years, and then decided I would run for office against Mary Landrieu and Bill Cassidy. And I think we had a good run, learned a lot of lessons from that. And what we bring to the table is that national security expertise and strong social values and a willingness to stand by the Constitution of the United States. We put it in the phrase of our last campaign: liberty, prosperity, and certainty. I'm going to fight for individual liberty that's required to be fought for because that's the foundation of our Constitution. I'm going to fight for policies that create an effective environment for prosperity for everybody, so everybody has the opportunity to be prosperous. And I'm going to fight for a strong national defense that's created correctly, and we spend the right amount of money for the right reasons in the national security interests of the United States. And that way we can have the certainty of a strong United States, not only for ourselves, but for our allies. And when the U.S. is stronger and a leader in the world, then the world is a safer place. And we all know that from our past experience. And unfortunately, we appear to be going down a path where that is in question.
Amen. Well, Colonel Rob Maness, you brought up an interesting one as we close out. You said Mary Landrieu, and I thought, and thank you very much for your service in helping to defeat her. One way or the other.
I'm proud to help unify the party to get behind Dr. Cassidy when we went into the runoff and remove her from office.
Very good. Colonel, thank you again. We'll talk to you some more, I'm sure, in the next few months.
Okay, thank you, Ken. I appreciate you having me on. I look forward to the next time.
All right, bye-bye. It is 5:14 at KPEL. That was Colonel Rob Maness talking about his possible candidacy for the U.S. Senate. As he said, he's doing some exploratory work now. They had to file papers with the Senate to be able to do that.